When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes? Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Janet. How are you?
I'm good. I was just thinking about your family's history in your house and how consuming that is and what's coming up for you. And it made me think also that I just moved a few months ago and what that whole process is like. And actually, it made us, both you and I, think about the book, The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning by Margareta Magnussen. And it was a best-selling New York Times bestseller. And I thought about it some while I was going through all the stuff in my attic that had years and years and years of stuff in it, including a little bit of my children's baby clothes and some toys that they had when they were little and photo albums and all sorts of things, my own professional stuff. And I know you are going through something even more intense and significant than what I went through. So we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I've been thinking about the subject a lot. And one of the things that brought that particular book into my head was we're getting ready to record our next edition of the Oldish Book Club. And the book that we're reading is her follow-up book to that one that's called
The Swedish Art of Aging Exuberantly.
Okay, yes. The Swedish Art of Aging Exuberantly,
And the other part of it is The Swedish Art of Aging Exuberantly, Life Wisdom from Someone Who Will, quote unquote, probably die before you. That's the complete title of what we'll be talking about.
Yes, that's an interesting title. Very, very interesting book. We've put off recording that episode a couple of times because of oldish-related allergies and other things that have made it difficult for us to get together and record our discussion of that book. But while reading that book, I kept thinking about The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. When I first heard that title, I said, what could that possibly be? I started thinking of Ingmar Bergman and the dark Swedish movies from back in the 50s and 60s. And I'm like, oh, that sounds strange. But it turns out that the art of death cleaning is realizing that you're going to die and your kids don't need to deal with all of this crap. And so the death cleaning is clean it yourself before you die is the message. I haven't read the book yet, but I plan to. But I feel like I'm living the book, or I'm living the absence of the book. I said to you earlier that I wish I could go back in time and give a copy of that book to my parents and my brother, because our faithful listeners know that I've been in the house that I grew up in for the last few months because my brother, who had stayed on after our parents died, passed away in January. And it had been a while since anybody decided that it was a good idea that that thing over there in the corner wasn't crap. So I'm dealing with that on a very deep, very emotional, very physically intensive, exhausting, dusty. And I'm having that experience of it, just digging through that. And I have made a personal vow to go back home and throw just about everything away. Because most of the stuff that I'm picking up, I'm like, I know it has a story because there's things on shelves and there are things in stacks on shelves. Somebody put it there. So every single thing has a story. I have no idea what any of those stories are trying to tell me or what they were. And there's a pretty good chance that if I could ask my parents or my brother, what's this thing there for? They'd say, oh, I didn't know it was there. I didn't put it there. And photo albums, there's stacks of family photo albums. And I look at the pictures, 99% of the people in the pictures in those photo albums, I have no idea who they are. So if I keep them, my kids are going to look at them, yet one more level removed. And it's like, Dad, what'd you keep this for? And, I don't know. So I'm not going to.
Yes. And I found that when I was going through my home before I moved a few months ago, I did have this very consciously in my mind of looking at something, opening a box and thinking, oh, look at that. I remember that from when I was in college. I remember that when my kids were little. And it's like, do my kids want to see that? Are they going to be interested in keeping that? And it helped me because then I'd think, okay, if I get rid of it now, then they don't have to go through this again and say, oh, yeah, why did Mom keep that? So it helped me. It was hard. But I wonder, Greg, do you think if you could have given your parents this book, The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, do you think that would have made a difference for them?
No, I'm pretty sure that I would have found that book underneath a pile of other books, possibly unopened.
I wonder if it's the phenomenon of our time as far as baby boomers. I don't know if any articles have been written about that, but whether we're an age group that feels like this isn't worth saving. Whereas when you think about older generations, especially people came from other countries and they were bringing their grandmother's crocheted lace that went on the armchair and the petticoats that their mother had sewn. And I don't have those kinds of things and don't feel that way about a lot of things. It brings memories, but they're my memories. And if I'd left those things for my children, they would not know what those memories are.
Yeah.
So it's almost like one of the takeaways is, first of all, for us as oldish people to go through 80%, 90% of our stuff and get rid of it. And if there's something that we think is important for our kids, to tell them while we're alive and decide together, this is why this is important to me. Do you think you're going to want it? And even, this is important to me. Do you think you'll want it now? Because I'm going through all my stuff and getting rid of it so you don't have to go through that after I die.
Yeah, I think that's probably is a good idea. There's one funny thing for me here is that back, I don't know, in the 80s, my parents decided that they wanted to do some of their post-death stuff early so that their children wouldn't have to deal with it. But what they did is they bought a cemetery plot and they bought their headstones and had their headstones carved with everything but the date of death. And when they first told me about that, I was like, well, that's part of the grieving process is you come in and you take care of all of that stuff. So you're taking away my ability to have an important part of the emotional process of grieving. And I still sort of feel that way, but not as much. But this is different. This is, get rid of the stuff. A lot of the stuff is like, if they really cared about it, it wouldn't be in a box in the attic. If they really cared about it, it wouldn't be in a box in the garage. So if they didn't really care about it, why am I going to really care about it? I hope this holds long enough for me to empty out my house. But there's also some danger that there's some stuff here where I say, I got to keep that for one reason or another. There's some danger that an excess amount of the stuff that's in this house ends up in my house in a box in the garage.
Yes. Well, Greg, we'll have to revisit this in a few months and talk about it. One of my kids lives in Sweden, and he's moving right now in Sweden to another place. And he's talking about going through all of his stuff. And I'm sure he's not going through it in this way, but he's getting rid of stuff. And I talked about this, the gentle art of Swedish death cleaning. And I said how much I did to get rid of things in my attic so that he and my other two children wouldn't have to go through these things when I die. And he said, I really appreciate that. So, but I had the same dilemma in my mind as I went through things. One of it was, if my children went through all of this after I died, they would learn a lot about me probably, even if they didn't want to keep it. So that it would be part of the grieving process. But in the end, I just felt like, first of all, I was moving somewhere where I didn't have room to store all of that. So it was just a major decision about, I cannot bring all this with me. So, and where I lived previously, I had a huge attic. So it really wasn't that much of an issue. But I felt like I can either get a storage space. I could rent a storage unit, which I have some negative reactions to, even though I know it's fairly helpful for people sometimes. But for me to rent a storage space so I can hold on to things that are part of my past that maybe nobody else will ever want to really connect with, then that's just wasting money and space when I could go through it now, which is what I did. It's an interesting process and a question and kind of a moral dilemma and an existential dilemma.
Yeah. One of the factors that I've been struggling with, and I think I'm winning, is not keeping any particular thing, is not keeping this, being disrespectful to my parents or other ancestors. If I really revered my parents and other ancestors, should I keep their stuff? One of the things that's helping me is there were two things that I came across a few years ago, and it wasn't in relationship to anybody had died. They just came across. One of them was that I heard while I was driving, I heard something on NPR about something about this, and a woman had written a book called My Mother Is Not a Couch. And about her struggle to let go of her mother's couch. After her mother passed away, she brought her couch home and it was in her living room. She hated the couch. She didn't hate it, but she, it wasn't her couch. It didn't fit the living room, but it was her mother's couch. And so she felt that it was honoring her mother to keep the couch. And then one day she got up and she said, wait a minute, my mother's not a couch. My mother,
Exactly,
I honor my
yes.
mother by being the kind of person that she hoped I would be when I grew up. That's how I honor
And
my ancestors.
Exactly, with memories. And I was just looking up while we were talking about another currently famous author who's written about cleaning, and her name is Marie Kondo. And she wrote about The Joy of Throwing Things Away is the name of it. And one of the things I think in that book, which I didn't read, but it has lots of ideas, like if there's photos in a photo album, you could take pictures of the ones that you want to remember and then put them in some kind of virtual something for your kids. Same thing with a sofa or a couch. It's like you could take a picture of it and get rid of the sofa because it wasn't your mother and you don't need to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah. For all I know, my mother didn't like that couch.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So I think I'm learning a lesson here. I've been telling myself I'm cleaning up my family karma by dealing with all this. The funniest thing, though, before I go on with that one, the funniest thing is the property has this huge 4-bay garage out back, and the garage has an attic. And when my brother sold his house in Virginia to move back here to take care of my parents when they got old, he put a lot of his stuff in boxes in the attic of the garage. And so I've been in the habit of, because I've been looking for things like copies of wills or titles to automobiles or whatever, if I pick up a box, I go through it to see if there's something in there that might be of value. There was this box in the attic of the garage, and in it was a letter from my mother to my brother. And it was just a chatty how you doing kind of a letter. He was living in Virginia. She was here in Massachusetts. And she, going on about her day. And she said, and your father is out in the garage, supposedly cleaning up. But you know as well as I do that there are broken televisions in the garage that he's never going to be able to throw away. So, and this was from like the 1980s that she wrote that letter to him. And I'm pretty sure that there are pieces of those broken televisions in the garage as we speak.
Wow.
So it's like, I'm not dishonoring my father to not keep that stuff. He was probably dishonoring something, but keeping it.
Well, it's making me think about the psychology of letting things go and what might be different for our generation, the baby boomers, generations around us, compared to the generation of people that came through World War II and the Great Depression, where having things, holding on to them was really important. I wonder if that plays into it at all, that now we can think about the gentle art. Of course, the tradition of Swedish death cleaning came from a tradition in Sweden from centuries ago. So that in particular had nothing to do with our country or the World War or the Great Depression here in the United States. But it's interesting to think about a little bit.
Yeah. A lot of factors in it. One of the problems that I've had my whole life with throwing things away is I may be cleaning up my space, but if I throw that thing away, it ends up in a landfill, which is everybody's space. And so I'm taking this pristine landscape and I'm filling it with my crap. And if you multiply that times 1 million people, there's a lot of stuff. But I've overcome that here because there was a thing when we were younger that I remember that was called aversion therapy, where a way to break an addiction or an attraction to something was to get too much of it. And my parents did that to me when I came home from the park one day, having been smoking cigarettes with some friends of mine, and I was 12. And so they decided that a good way to break me of that habit, which made no sense because they were both heavy smokers, but a good way to break me of that habit was to make me smoke an entire package of cigarettes unfiltered. And they had them in the house. But anyway, so I remember I smoked those cigarettes until I got really sick. And so maybe some of that's what's going on there. We'll just pile up all of this crap and it'll be so bad that we'll have to become ascetics and just not have anything.
That's disgusting, Greg. That's a horrible story.
I know it actually was pretty horrible. It's
Did you ever smoke again after that?
Oh yeah, I smoked until I was in my mid-30s. Partially, I used to.
So that was effective.
It didn't work. Because the peer pressure is stronger than that. Because now I got a good story. Oh yeah, my parents caught me, and I smoked until I puked, and that's a good story. Among the kids. But also I had this other thing going on with that, which is I was already going to be too tall when I was 12. And so I had heard that smoking cigarettes would stunt your growth. So
maybe you would have been even taller, Greg.
I think that probably cost me $10 million. If I'd have been 7 feet tall, 7 foot tall white guy in the 1960s was in the NBA.
Yes. Look what happened. Your parents should have been encouraging you to smoke or to not smoke, or to smoke. I don't know. I'm confused.
I'm confused too, but
yes.
That's not new.
Yes. Well, I wanted to respond to a couple of things. One about filling the landfill and how I was thinking a lot as I was going through so much stuff. What could I give away? I didn't bother to sell things, but I think it's a great idea. It's the same idea of keeping it in circulation and getting it to people who need it and want it. So that there was, recycling. So things that were paper that could be. It also made me think about, I feel so strongly that part of our work as adults, and especially as we're aging, is to model for our children what it looks like to be at whatever age we're at. So right now, what does it look like to be oldish, and how do we maneuver through this time in our lives? And this is part of it. So be able to model for our kids both the gentle art of Swedish death cleaning, doing this for their children, but also how to be responsible in their adult lives around how much they have, how much they use, so that they're not doing what our generation and some of the previous generations did of just buying without thought of what are we going to do with what I just bought, and do I need it? And if I don't need it, am I going to throw it away? And then it's going to go into the landfills, and it's such a waste, and it's taking valuable resources from our environment. So I feel like that's all that we're talking about fits into that category too, of modeling for our children. This is what it looks like to try to be responsible as we age.
Yeah, well, one of the things I think we have to do as a culture is break the consumerist cycle. One of the reasons that our generation, and starting with our parents, accumulated so much not real stuff. What is this? Why do we even have this? Is because that the post-World War II generation, the people that went through the Depression in World War II and became our parents, had lived through a time of real scarcity. And after World War II, the industrialization turning toward consumerism and the television driving consumerism, where you saw something on TV, you had to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
After my mother died, we discovered that part of her dementia was she would go online or watch TV and pick up the phone when she could still remember how to do that stuff. And she would buy something she saw an ad for. And it would show up at the house. She couldn't remember why she had bought it. My father had no idea. So there were 2 closets upstairs that were full of packages that had never been opened.
Wow.
Yeah. So the thrift stores were real happy after my mother passed away, because they got all this stuff that was still wrapped, and, LL Bean and the Sharper Image and all those kinds of early online retailers. There were 2 full closets of that stuff. And my mother had no idea she had it. By the time it showed up, she didn't remember buying it or remember that she had bought anything for that matter. But so I think some of that, though, was just this push. We're coming out of a time of scarcity, a huge time of terror, followed by the television coming on and saying, you have to have this stuff. You need to own one of these. You need to own 10 of these. You need to have a collection of plates of cheap ceramic pictures of the presidents, because they'll be collector's items, and someday you'll be rich. And there's some of that stuff here. And I'm hoping that maybe our kids won't be quite as much into that. I think our generation turned away from it a little bit because it was just overwhelming. We turned away from it a little bit, but it was still this big wave coming through us. But maybe our kids will be a little bit less, I hope.
Well, and again, maybe this is something, this choosing to clean out stuff that we have while we're still alive might help with that movement towards less. So that encourages me, because it was a hard process. And my parents definitely did not model that for me. I remember my mom, when she died, that there were closets of clothes that were hers. And it was almost disgusting to me. I knew she liked clothes, and I knew she had a lot of clothes, but I had no idea how many clothes she had, and shoes and pocketbooks. And I had to go through all of that with my dad and deal with all that. So maybe this, however many of us, baby boomers, however many of us can choose this for ourselves while we're still alive, we're giving ourselves a gift of going through stuff and deciding, that's it. Thank you for reminding me of that time in my life. Giving our children a gift, and not only giving our children the gift of not having to go through all of that, but also modeling, you don't need that much stuff.
Yeah, I think our kids will be grateful.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg, I wish you the best as you continue in this museum of your life and your parents' lives, and all that you continue to find there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I feel physically and emotionally and probably spiritually lighter every time they haul a dumpster away.
Good.
This is a multi-dumpster project.
Wow.
And every time one pulls out of the driveway, I feel lighter.
Yes, I bet.
Yeah.
How many more dumpsters do you see in your immediate future?
Possibly as many as 2, at least one more. There's one out there now that's half full. And that's just the stuff that I can bear to throw away. I have 2 other piles. One is a pile of, oh, that's a good thing. I want that. Or somebody I know wants that. Or it has some intrinsic value or some nostalgic value for me personally. And then there's another pile of, well, I don't want it, but there's some tools in the garage, for example, that I already have most of. But there's hundreds of dollars worth of tools in the garage. And so those aren't going in the dumpster. They're going to somebody else's garage.
Yes. Which I think is the best option, is sharing and making things continue to be useful so that they aren't bought over and over again.
Yeah. I had this idea. I don't want to keep talking for too much longer because I got all this stuff I got to wade through. But one of the things as I was coming down the attic stairway today that crossed through my head was probably if somebody said, name the one thing that you would least like to do of anything that you could possibly do, what's the thing that you would least like to do? And I probably would answer, sit in a yard sale or a flea market all day, selling off some bric-a-brac. But when I was coming down the attic carrying some crap today, it occurred to me that if I reframed that, there's a bunch of stuff here that is guaranteed to be good junk for somebody's, for a flea market or something. And it occurred to me that if I did a thing where I took a few boxes of stuff to a flea market and set it up and spent the day there and donated all of the proceeds to some charity or other, that would be a good penance. And it would be a good meditation on that whole thing. So I think sometimes you should do something you don't want to.
That is true.
Yeah. So I'm thinking maybe doing that. I think about one of those things in the progression from Gautama Shakyamuni to the Buddha was when he was a prince, he went off and spent the night in a cemetery. And nobody wants to spend the night in a cemetery, but he spent the night in a cemetery contemplating death. And after he came out of there, he wasn't afraid of death anymore. So maybe I'll do something like that. And 2,500 years from now, when people are telling the story of Lord Gregg, they'll tell about the time that he spent the day in the flea market.
Maybe. And it'll be documented here first, so it'll be added to the troves of valuable information about your life.
Yes, this transcript will end up in the scriptures.
Yes. Well, with that, but going back just a few paces to just the wisdom of doing things that are hard for us, and that this is hard. It's hard for many people to acknowledge that their life is going to end, which is the first step in this, and to acknowledge that the things that matter to us don't necessarily matter to anybody else. They're our own personal memories. And maybe some people that it also mattered to aren't even here anymore or might not be here soon. So, and then thinking about how that we can do this as a gift for our children.
Yeah. Yes. And there are many, many people who have children that they would like to give gifts to. And the gift of not having to do that, and possibly the gift of spending more time with our children and grandchildren, because we don't have to spend so much time with all this other stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay. Well, it's been fun.
It has been fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knew?
Happy death cleaning.
Happy death cleaning. Yes. Thank you. I'm glad we came across that book because I had no idea, but it gives us a good framework for this. So,
yes.
And so because of that, the follow-up book to that is
the Swedish Art of Aging Exuberantly with Margareta Magnussen.
Yes. And so those of you who have been following along with the Oldish Book Club, that's what's coming up next. And as soon as everybody is in one place and healthy long enough, we will do our conversation about that book. And so if you want to read along, now would be a good time to do it.
Okay. Have a good rest of the day. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. And as always, we love to hear your feedback, and we'll look forward to that too.
Yes, looking forward to that. And as always, I feel differently about things having spoken with you, Janet, today than I did before we started. And I learned some things and had some laughs doing it and some smiles. And it's always nice to hang out with you.
I agree. I feel the same way, Greg. So goodbye
Bye,
for
Janet.
now.
Bye, Janet. Bye,
Goodbye.
everybody.
Bye.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. It's time to go throw away more stuff. Up next is a new edition of our Oldish Book Club. This time we're reading The Swedish Art of Aging Exuberantly by Margareta Magnussen. It's the story of how, after she completed her own Swedish death cleaning and wrote the book, she kept on living her life and celebrating oldishness. You can find this and all the books we talk about in our shop at bookshop.org/shop/oldish. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there, too, if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.